Hey YouTube, right here. I want to go ahead and weigh in on the whole Berkeley situation and Antifa and BAMN and all that sort of shit. Now, they've got a little Asian woman that's going ahead and trying to spin it like they're doing the right thing, that they're just in what they're doing. They're not. They're using violence against groups that aren't using violence until it is absolutely necessary to defend their own from the violence of the groups that I just mentioned. Now, it's funny that the mainstream media isn't sitting there and saying the truth. You know, they're giving part of the truth. They're not giving the full story. They're giving a very general story. And this comes after them spinning the narrative that Antifa and all that are peaceful protesters, that they're doing things legally, so on and so forth. They're not. They're not getting the permits that they need. Whereas these other groups are getting the permits, which allows other groups to organize against them. These other groups that are organizing against them aren't getting permits, so these people have no heads up on what's coming. Do they know what's coming? Yes. Yet they're still not fighting back. Not until it's absolutely necessary. And people are faulting the conservative groups for fighting back against people hitting them over the heads with bike locks and socks, stabbing them with knives, pulling out individuals into the middle of the opposing group and beating them on the ground half to death. I mean, when you sit there and you look at that, you're all like, yeah, these people have a right to defend themselves. Well, at least a sane person does. But here's the problem. The mayor of Berkeley, the mayor of Berkeley is telling the police to not interfere until absolutely necessary. What's considered absolutely necessary? Once someone's on the ground getting stomped. The opposing side can come out, start shoving and pushing and hitting and all of that sort of shit. But it's not until someone's on the ground getting beaten that the police go ahead and actually jump in. They will sit there and watch violence being committed against the group that is there legally by the group that is there illegally. Until it's going to look really bad if they don't do something. You know, like if they let someone get beaten to death on the ground and do nothing. And then jump in and arrest the conservatives who are there, who were gathered peacefully, who were sitting there and saying that everyone deserves a voice. Yada, 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 all the way down the line. So, my question is, what would happen if there was a liberal gathering where they actually went through, did all that, and then conservatives went in and started pulling the same exact shit? I would love to see what would happen. Because I guarantee you the police would instantly jump in and arrest any conservative that even got close. If the conservatives were to initiate the violence. But you don't see that. And the thing is at this point, I'm questioning why. Because a lot of people are all like, oh, you can't fight violence with violence. Yeah, actually you can, and in certain situations it is necessary. This is one of those situations where it is necessary. And quite frankly, we have a lot of conservatives that are sitting there and saying, you can't take our guns because it is our right to be able to defend ourselves. Well, guess what? It's time to start putting that into practice. But the funny thing is the laws, especially here in California, do not permit you to use your weapons for self-defense. In fact, the only thing you're really allowed to use them for without having a special permit from the government, which, by the way, is unconstitutional. I don't care what that old hag in DC says. That is fucking unconstitutional. You are not allowed to tell us that we cannot use guns to defend ourselves from deadly threats. And Antifa and BAMN are deadly threats. They are ganging up on people anytime in a court that you have a group of people beating on one person. If that person stands up and ends up fighting back and ends up killing one or two of the other people in that group that's attacking them, it is considered self-defense, that they automatically can consider that group a deadly threat because of the pure and simple fact that it is a group of people versus one. So, why is it the police are doing nothing? You have to go ahead and ask yourself that. Got a simple answer. It's because it's what the government wants. And I'm not just talking federal government, I'm talking about local governments, I'm talking about any level of government you want to talk about here. They want this. Because either way it plays out, they win. Because you've got one group fighting to end freedom of speech, freedom of expression, freedom to defend yourself. And then you've got another group that is getting sick and tired of it and is getting pretty close to saying, you know what, we're willing to give up freedoms if it means you protect us from this violent group after all this time. If that's what's holding you back, go ahead. We'll give you more of our freedoms. We'll give up more of our freedoms for further protection. So either way you look at it, the government is looking to benefit from this. The only thing that they don't benefit from is conservatives fighting back, preserving freedom of speech, which is funny because that used to be a liberal thing. It's funny that they're calling these right-wing extremists alt-right. In other words, alternative right. What are they an alternative from? Because here's the thing. I'm one of those people, pretty much everything to me is cyclic. All right? You don't, you know, if you progress too far for one side, you pop out on the other. Well, the left has gone so far left that they've actually ended up going into the right. That's what it is. These far leftists have gone so far down that rabbit hole that they have popped out on the other side. Because if you go ahead and you compare the alt-right, you know, the real alt-right, not what they say is the alt-right. If you really go ahead, you know, and compare, you know, Nazis and all of that, and the actions of said Nazis to the actions of Antifa, to the actions of BAMN, to the actions of a lot of these SJWs, if you go ahead and actually compare their actions, you will see very little difference. Same tactics, same style of rhetoric. Doesn't matter. They're going to see a lot of similarities there. And one of the similarities is fascist views. So, how do you fight that? No. One of the ways is by preserving freedom of speech. Because as people are able to openly talk about this, these groups lose support. The second way is having a media that accurately represents situations in their reporting. Non-bias, just sheer fact reporting. And as accurate of facts as possible, down to the finest detail. We haven't been seeing that. The media has been sitting there, and if it ends up that a conservative ended up starting a fight, conservatives spark riot, da 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 da. But if it's the left, you know, if it's Antifa, if it's any of these groups, they will either keep it ambiguous. You know, they'll sit there and say 13 stabbed and hurt at protests, and then try to blame the conservatives. You know, all the people that were stabbed and sent to the hospital. They try to blame that group by way of omission of information. They try to make it sound that way because of the previous narratives that they've spun. A lot of people are thinking that conservatives are this super violent, super racist, super bigoted, you know, yada, 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 yada. You know, I can go on and on and on with the negative descriptors that you have for conservatives. And the narrative is that the leftists, you know, they always have a good reason. You know what a good reason is? When a group comes in, starts throwing explosives into your group, starts pulling individuals out and beating them to death, starts shoving or throwing heavy objects at the group, then you have a good reason to be violent. You have a good reason to fight. Because at that point, you are preserving yourself. Antifa never has, in my observation, ever had a good reason to use violence. So it's time for people to stand up and show them exactly what happens.